Hello, everyone. I'm Jed Rubenfeld, and this is Straight Down the Middle. Today's episode is going to be all about the tariffs. As I'm sure you know, on Friday morning, the Supreme Court, in its first real blockbuster of the new term, finally decided the much anticipated tariffs case. And guess what? The court struck them down. Well, that's a major rebuke of the administration. That's rejecting President Trump's signature policy of his second term. And the effects of this case could be massive politically and economically. So, Professor, are Trump's tariffs dead in the water? No, they are not. In fact, on the contrary, I think the court has left a pretty clear path open for the president to reenact most and maybe all of the tariffs it just struck down. Wait a second, Professor. You're saying the Supreme Court struck down the tariffs, but at the same time said that President Trump could reenact the tariffs? That is exactly what I'm telling you. And if you're a little confused about that, well, just listen to this episode because I am going to walk you through it. All right, let's get started. First thing you might want to know is that not all of Trump's tariffs were at issue in this case. For example, the president has enacted a number of industry-specific tariffs, and those remain untouched. So what was this case about? Well, this case was about the worldwide reciprocal tariffs that the president started imposing on nations all over the world back in April. What are these tariffs? This is where the president says, look, I think this country is treating U.S. Goods or commerce unfairly. I think this country is discriminating against our products. He has said he's looked at various countries and he has imposed country by country tariffs on those countries, sometimes 10%, sometimes 25%, sometimes 50%. And he has asserted the power to impose these tariffs on each country and to bring them back when he wants, reduce them, increase them when he wants. And he has used those tariffs as leverage to get a number of important international agreements. Those are the tariffs that primarily the case that the Supreme Court decided on Friday was all about. And the court said, sorry, those tariffs, which are really, in a sense, the most important set of tariffs of Trump's second term, sorry, those tariffs are unlawful. Well, what did the court say, Professor? What was the legal issue? How did they decide? Why were the tariffs unlawful? All right, here's what you need to know first thing. There was 170 pages of opinions in this case, so I'm not going to go through all those 170 pages. I'm not even going to go through all the opinions. I'm going to have to simplify quite a bit, but I think I'm going to be able to communicate to you the fundamentals of what the court held and how the justices split, because they did split. They were sharply divided. In fact, there was no real majority opinion in the case, not on the merits. Three conservatives on the court, that'd be Roberts, Gorsuch, and Barrett, they said the challenge tariffs were illegal for one reason. They were joined by the three liberal justices, that'd be Kagan, Sotomayor, and Jackson, who said tariffs are illegal, but for a different reason. Then the three remaining conservatives, Kavanaugh, Alito, and Thomas, with Kavanaugh writing the dissenting opinion, they disagreed, and they said, no, we think the tariffs are totally lawful. Okay, so what was going on? Well, the bottom line in all these opinions is not so complicated. Here's how things worked. For more than a year, administration lawyers have relied on a single statute to defend these tariffs. What statute is that? It's called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the IEEPA. And that's a statute that the executive orders invoked, and that's the only statute that the administration's lawyers have ever relied on and put before the courts to defend these tariffs. Well, there's a little problem with that argument. Here's the problem. That statute, the IEEPA, that statute never mentions the word tariffs. And guess what? No president before Trump had ever invoked that statute to impose tariffs. And on top of that, every court to rule on this case has held that that statute, the IEEPA, doesn't authorize tariffs. So that's a little problem with the administration's argument. And On Friday, the Supreme Court agreed with those other courts and said, you know what? That statute, IEEPA, that does not authorize the president to impose tariffs. I'll give you a little quote from Chief Justice Roberts' opinion. Here's what he said. Had Congress intended to convey the distinct and extraordinary power to impose tariffs, this is all from the Roberts opinion, it would have done so expressly. So what is it exactly that the IEEPA says, and how did the government's argument work? Well, I'll tell you a little bit about it. I'm going to quote to you some of the text from that statute. Under the IEEPA, after having declared an economic emergency of a certain kind, which Trump has declared, the president can, under the terms of the statute, throws a whole bunch of words together. There's this long list of what the president can do, and here's part of it. Having declared that emergency, the president can investigate, block, regulate, direct and compel, nullify, void, prevent, or prohibit a bunch of things, including the importation of any property in which any foreign country or any foreign national has an interest. Now, what the administration's lawyers did was they plucked out two words from that long list. They plucked out the word regulate and they plucked the word importation. And they said was, and you know what? They banked the whole case on this claim. They banked the whole case on the claim that the power to regulate includes the power to impose tariffs. On that sole argument, the administration rested the legality of $1 trillion in tariff revenues, as well as the numerous trade deals and other deals that the president struck with other countries using tariffs as leverage. Well, in my opinion, that move by the administration's lawyers, that proved to be a very costly mistake. The three conservative justices ruling against the tariffs, they relied on something called the major questions doctrine. Professor, what the heck is that? Well, according to the major questions doctrine, which is a constitutional doctrine that has risen to prominence in the last few years, more than it used to have, according to that doctrine, when the executive branch claims that a statute authorizes it to do something, take some action, and that action is one of major economic or political significance, well, according to the major questions doctrine, the executive branch can't do that, not unless the statute in question clearly and expressly grants that power. So I'll repeat that. Under the major questions doctrine, the executive can't claim the power to take some unusual action of major economic and political significance under a statute unless the statute says so clearly, unless it clearly and expressly grants the executive that power. And the three conservative justices said, that's this case. What are you talking about? These tariffs are of enormous economic and political significance. The statute says regulate. It doesn't expressly give the power to the president to impose tariffs. Easy case. The president loses. The three liberal justices, the ones who also ruled against the tariffs, they had a little problem with that because they've criticized the major questions doctrine in prior cases. They're not crazy about the major questions doctrine. So they said, we're not relying on the major questions doctrine. For us, said these three justices in an opinion written by Justice Kagan, they said, no, this is an easy case. It's just plain old statutory interpretation. Here's how it works, said Justice Kagan. Look, tariffs are taxes, and the word regulate, both in common parlance and as Congress uses it, does not encompass taxing. So just to put that in other words, make it simple, basically these justices are saying, look, tons of statutes out there use the word regulate. Show us one single case where we have said that a statute that gives the executive the power to regulate includes in that term the power to tax. You can't do it, the justices said, because we don't interpret the word regulate that way. So they said, easy case, regulate. The power to regulate doesn't mean tax. Tariffs are taxes. Administration loses. Okay, so what did Justice Kavanaugh say, writing for the dissenters, the three dissenters? Well, it's a long opinion. He says, look, this is not a major questions case. But, basically what he says is, I disagree. The power to regulate does include the power to tariff. Um, uh, he said that it's crazy. The statute, and we all agree that the statute gives the president the power to do much more draconian stuff like embargo or block imports altogether. Everybody agrees the statute does that. Like in theory, under the IEEPA, the president could block all products coming in from China. And so what Kavanaugh says, look, if the statute gives him that power to block imports completely, which it does, how can we hold that it doesn't include the much lesser power of putting a $1 tariff or a 5% tariff or whatever he wants, so, any kind of tariff on those goods? So that's how Kavanaugh saw it, and he said, so yeah, I think we can read the statute with the word regulate in it to include the power to impose tariffs. But only 3 justices agreed with that. 6 justices said no, so the administration lost the case. Lost the case under the IEEPA. But Kavanaugh made another point in his dissent. Something else he said that the 6 other justices did not disagree with that could turn out to be much more important. What was this other point that Kavanaugh made? Well, he said, look, there's a bunch of other statutes out there that do expressly give the president the power to enact tariffs. And he said that most, if not all, of the challenged tariffs in this case could have been lawfully enacted under different statutes. And one of the statutes that he pointed to in particular is the Tariff Act of 1930, which, as Kavanaugh put it, and I am quoting here, expressly authorizes the president to impose tariffs on any country he wants, in any amount he wants, up to 50%, when he finds, and I'm quoting, that any foreign country places any burden or disadvantage upon the commerce of the United States. Well, you think about that language, and it kind of fits what President Trump's been doing with these tariffs like a glove. It's kind of exactly what he was doing. He finds that countries are placing burdens or disadvantages on U.S. commerce, and he says, I'm going to hit you with some tariffs as a result. And he puts various amounts of tariffs on various countries. He went up over 50% on China for a while, but I think all of the existing tariffs that were struck down in the court's opinion on Friday, I think all of them are now below 50%. So it looks to me like virtually all the tariffs that were struck down on Friday could have been lawfully enacted under the Tariff Act of 1930. Now, if you've followed my writing or my podcast before, you know that I have been pointing out this 1930 statute for some time. And I've been saying, look, I think this was the right statute for the president to have gone under if he wants to impose these statutes, legally speaking. I'm not making comments about the policy merits of tariffs. I don't know. But just as a matter of law, that if he had invoked the 1930 statute, or if the government's lawyers had simply argued the 1930 statute, I think that would have provided a much stronger legal foundation for the president's worldwide reciprocal tariffs, the ones that were struck down on Friday. And I'll quote Justice Kavanaugh again from his dissent, where he says, today's Supreme Court decision essentially holds, here now I'm quoting, that the president checked the wrong statutory box by relying on the IEEPA rather than another statute to impose these tariffs. For example, the 1930 Act, under which it appears that the president could have lawfully enacted all of the tariffs, or almost all the tariffs, that were struck down on Friday. Now, what did the other 6 justices say about these other statutes and including the 1930 Act? What did they say about those statutes? Not one of the other opinions discussed whether Trump could have imposed the tariffs at issue under any of those statutes, including the 1930 Tariff Act. Now, it's very important what they are saying, what they're not saying. These 6 justices, they did not call into question Congress's power to grant the president the ability to impose tariffs. They didn't say that's unconstitutional. See, a lot of folks have been arguing that only Congress can impose tariffs, and Congress cannot pass a statute that gives the president that power. That argument was being made, and guess what? That argument was not adopted or accepted by any justice in Friday's opinions, and it runs contrary to decisions from the Supreme Court for 100 years. For 100 years, more than 100 years, Congress has passed statutes given the president to impose tariffs in various circumstances, and the courts, including the Supreme Court, have upheld those statutes. So none of the opinions from Friday suggests that those existing statutes, like the Tariff Act of 1930, that expressly give the president a tariffing power, that they're unconstitutional or should even be read narrowly. On the contrary, what those 6 justices were saying is that the IEEPA doesn't give the president the express power to impose tariffs. But so another statute that does give the president the express power to impose tariffs would have been perfectly fine. And that's, for example, the 1930 Tariff Act, which gives the president the power to do pretty much exactly what he did in his worldwide reciprocal tariffs, the ones that were struck down. And that's why I've been saying that the opinion, although it has ruled the existing tariffs unlawful, is leaving a path pretty clearly open for the president to resurrect or try to reenact all or almost all of the tariffs that were struck down on Friday. Now, why didn't the administration rely on the 1930 Tariff Act when that statute fits his tariffs pretty much like a glove? Well, it's a bit of a mystery. And I'll tell you what I think might be part of the reason. I think they didn't see it. A lot of people had forgotten about the 1930 Tariff Act. A lot of people didn't realize that that statute is still on the books, fully operational today, and that, as Justice Kavanaugh says, it authorizes the president, even today, to impose tariffs on any country that he finds to be imposing burdens or disadvantages on U.S. commerce. I think maybe they just missed it. So what happens next? Well, what happens next is unclear. First of all, how about refunds? Everybody who paid any money under one of the tariffs today anybody who paid any money under any one of the tariffs that were ruled unlawful by the Supreme Court, they're pretty much almost certain to sue for a refund. And you know what the total liability of the United States might be to refund all those tariffs? It could run to the hundreds of billions of dollars. None of the justices said a word about that potential liability or how it's supposed to be adjudicated. But countless companies, I'm telling you, they've already prepared to seek those refunds in court. And a number of entities, companies, have already commenced proceedings to get their refunds. And nobody knows how that's going to work. It's going to be a mess. The Supreme Court has remanded this case to a lower court, and probably in the first instance, that lower court's going to have to decide how's the refund process going to work. But now, turning away from those refunds, what's the president going to do? Well, as you may have read, the president has already announced that he is going to take advantage of this path that the court seems to have left open. He's already announced that he's trying to reimpose or reenact some tariffs under other statutes. He initially announced that he was going to reimpose a 10% worldwide tariff under a different statute. That would be the Trade Act of 1974, which is time limited. It lets him do it for maybe 150 days. He's also recently said, no, I'm going to go up higher than 10%. And he's invoked yet another statute, which has its own procedural and substantive limitations. None of these other statutes that he has mentioned so far, and that his lawyers have, I guess, brought to his attention so far to try to invoke in order to reimpose some of these tariffs, none of them is like the Tariff Act of 1930, which gives the president an express and sweeping power to impose tariffs on a country by country basis at any amount he chooses, up to 50%, provided that he finds that that country is imposing burdens or disadvantages on U.S. commerce. And that statute leaves it up to him. The statute says whenever he finds that another country is imposing burdens or disadvantages on U.S. commerce, he can impose those tariffs. So the president has not yet come to or invoked the 1930 Tariff Act. I think we might see him do it in the near future. It is even possible that using the 1930 Tariff Act, he can defend against the refund claims and, in a way, retroactively legalize the tariffs that he's imposed since last April and avoid the $300 billion liability that the United States might have to pay. I'll talk more about that possibility or the strategies available for that and the objections to those possible strategies in another episode. But for now, let me close with this. I think the bottom line here is as follows, that while Trump's massive reciprocal tariffs have been knocked to the floor and they're knocked down for now, I don't think they're out for good. Not yet. Okay, that's all from me for now. I'll see you on the next Straight Down the Middle.